What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you a spoiler-free review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So I just got done seeing this in the theaters and I have quite a few things to say. We're going to go through the positives and the negatives and then give it a rating out of 10 at the very end. I just want to say right off the bat that my opinion on the first film is probably quite unpopular. I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I actually like it quite a bit. I just don't think it's the masterpiece that a lot of people say it is. I don't have it in my top 10 comic book movies. I don't even have it in my top 20. It's somewhere in my top 30 probably, but I don't think it's like that fantastic all around. And I definitely do think I'm a little biased here and there because I definitely prefer live action over animation. Not to say I don't enjoy animation. There's tons of animated films I love, and I think animation has a great place in cinema. It's just not my preference. I just don't get attached to the characters as much when it's like that. Maybe that's my fault, I don't know, but it's just how I am, so I can't really force that to change. But like I said, I still think the first film was like a 9 out of 10, so I was looking forward to this movie. I wasn't over the moon excited for it like a lot of people were, but after I rewatched it a few days ago, I actually liked it a bit more on my rewatch, and so I got quite more excited to see this, and yeah, I got quite a bit to say about it. So starting off with the positives, this movie is 100% a love letter to Spider-Man fans of the non-live action Spider-Man media. So what I mean by that is Spider-Man No Way Home was basically a love letter to fans of the Spider-Man live action things, like of course the movies. And it completely did that, obviously, with bringing back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, as well as a bunch of different villains from those films. And of course, it just kind of tied up and wrapped up a lot of those story arcs. And then of course, this movie is kind of the complete opposite, where it's a love letter to fans of the non-live action things, such as the Spider-Man comics, Spider-Man animated shows, and even the Spider-Man video games. I'm not going to spoil exactly which versions of these characters show up in the movie, but trust me, it's a love letter to all of those things, and especially comics. There's tons of different versions of Spider-Man that you might see in the comics that do appear here. Obviously, the ones that have been shown in the trailers quite a bit and are definitely not spoilers to talk about would be ones such as Spider-Man 2099. He was even teased at the end of the first film, and he's been on all the marketing, all the trailers and such, and yeah, he is definitely one of the highlights of this movie. But it's just cool to see all these things come to life to the big screen because, of course, we've never seen them on the big screen until now. Of course, the same thing I would say about the first film. The unique animation is just really cool. Like, although I said before, like, animation is usually not my thing, that doesn't mean I can't appreciate it and really enjoy certain things they do with it. And a lot of what they do here, I absolutely adore. Like, there is so much work put into some of the art styles that they do, and because it's a multiverse story, they're able to do different art styles for each universe, which is very different than your typical movie, because obviously most movies tend to stick to one art style for the entire film. But because they go to different universes, they change the art style as they go to different universes, which I think is such a cool and unique idea. And even when those characters come from one universe to another, they will keep that art style. So then you get a situation where you have a bunch of different characters on screen and they're all sorts of different art styles. The first film kind of did that, of course, with the other Spider-Men that were there, of course, like the Spider-Pig, what was it, Peter Porker or something? Like, he definitely looked different than the other characters, but in general, it wasn't that different. But this is like another level where it's just 100%, like, some characters have completely different designs, and they go pretty far with that. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but there are a lot of cool things there. One thing that makes it really special, though, is that it really does have to be animated. Most animated films do not have to be animated, straight up. Like, they don't. Like, of course, it's cool that they are, but they really don't have to be. Think of a movie like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. You could easily make that live action, and it wouldn't really change much. You just have to obviously turn it into live action. You'd have CGI food. This you can't, because it feels like the characters are all aware of the fact that they are animated. Obviously, you could look at something else like Star Wars The Clone Wars. Like, you have that alongside live action stuff. So obviously the characters in those animated projects, they're not supposed to technically be like animated. It's just animated for that. But when you go to a movie like this, everyone in that universe is 100% like, they know they're animated because they even talk about it. When certain characters look very different in their other universes, they notice it, they reference it, and they're like, oh, that looks different. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have that sort of feel that other animated films have, where they really don't have to be. This, you have to be animated. That's what makes it special. That's what makes it unique. And I would say the same thing about the first film, but this one, again, goes even further with it. So the point stands even more. And of course, seeing all the different Spider-Men, Spider people, there's tons of different Spider people in this. It's awesome. There are so many different types, so many different ones, and even some of them are just small little cameos that just kind of flash in there for like 2 seconds, but it's cool to see. And it kind of just lets you, point at things. You're like, oh, that looks cool. Oh, that's from that. Oh, that's from. It's cool to do that. I definitely think some of those versions they could have used a little bit more. There was one in particular, I won't spoil it, but I really wanted to see more of it, but they kind of just showed it for a second, and it was like, okay, it's cool, but I would have loved to see that for a little bit more in the film. But they have a big focus on the main story, the main plot, and they really needed to focus on that, so it makes sense why they didn't focus on the little cameos for much more than what they did. The movie's overall plot is a very typical multiverse storyline, which is kind of a good and bad thing. I'll talk about that in the bad a little bit later, but for the good about that, I do really like that plot, the plots that they go with. So first of all, the question of, if you knew the future, would you change it? That's a big time travel multiverse type concept, and that is explored here. And also the idea of, would you save someone you love even if that meant possibly destroying the universe or killing many other people? That kind of a, question. Many Spider-Man things out there, media in general, they tend to focus on that question for Spider-Man, and that question gets asked in this movie, and I think it brings a pretty interesting conflict between these characters. And this is not a spoiler because trailers showed this pretty frequently, but yes, that does cause a big conflict between the Spider people. There's a lot of them that are against Miles Morales in this movie, and it draws a big situation in the movie, and it was very, very cool to see. I also love that this movie spends a lot of time on just character growth and dialogue. I know there's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to say the opposite. They just want to see more action, but honestly, especially in a movie like this where the animation can kind of give you headaches after a little bit, you do need some of those slower moments where characters are just talking to each other and just growing. And I think this movie does a lot of that, and it does it even better than the first one. So especially with Miles Morales' parents, absolutely love them in this movie. And even just from a humor perspective, the movie had a lot of good comedy, probably just as much as the first one. And especially with Miles' dad, I've just cracked up every scene he was in, the things he was saying. But I really do love the scenes between Miles, his dad, and his mother in this movie. There's a couple of one-on-ones between them. There's a couple of scenes with all of them together, and all of them are amazing. And they build these characters to be so much more likable than they were in the first one. Even though they were good in the first one, I just didn't care as much as I do, I feel like, now after seeing them in this one. Even with Gwen and her father, we get some scenes there. Fantastic scenes. I think there's definitely a couple other characters I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of. Peter B. Parker is one of them. They actually don't have much of him in this movie, which is kind of upsetting, but that's not the end of the world. It's just something I, noticed. I wish we saw a little bit more of him because I felt like he was one of the main characters of the first one, so it would have made sense to have more of him here too, but he didn't really have a big part in the movie other than 1 or 2 scenes. But even those 1 or 2 scenes were still phenomenal, with great dialogue that throws in humor every now and then, and it just worked for me very, very well. All the character motivations make a lot of sense from Spider-Man 2099, from some of the villains, from just, of course, Miles, Gwen, and other characters. They all make a lot of sense. They're all very compelling. I never sat there and went, that doesn't really make much sense. I never really questioned why characters were doing certain things. It all kind of made sense and all played together very nicely. There were some points where I questioned it, but it got answered within like seconds, so it wasn't really a big deal at the end of the day. And the last positive I want to say is the movie is really long. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes, but it does not feel even close to that long. Like when the movie ended, I was like, what the hell? That felt like an hour and 40 minutes. Like it felt very, very short, to the point where I questioned if I got the wrong information online, because I, of course, checked before watching the movie that I said 2 hours and 20 minutes. I thought maybe that was wrong, because I was like, wait, well, this felt like an hour 40 minutes, but no, 2 hours and 20 minutes went by. So quite crazy that happened, but I think the movie's just very well paced, so it doesn't feel long whatsoever, and that's a good thing in my opinion. So now let's get to the negatives. I only have like maybe 1 or 2 things to mention, and they're not really huge things if I'm gonna be honest, but the first one I want to say is, because this is a part 1 of a 2-part story, which that's confirmed, it was supposed to be a part 1 and part 2 title, but of course they changed the second film, the third film in the trilogy, but the second part to the story, they changed the title to Beyond the Spider-Verse. Now, because it's a part 1, it does feel very incomplete, and of course that is what it is exactly, but I feel like a lot of other movies out there that deal with doing like a two-part story, they end their first part in a much more climactic way than I feel like this movie does, because although there's a lot of great things that happen at the end in this movie, it never really felt that climactic. I kind of sat there like, I'm excited for the next one, but that wasn't really a good ending to this movie. You know, compare it to something like, let's say, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Those are very much a two-part story there. Infinity War, it felt very much like a closing. It felt very much like an end to a movie, and it felt like, yeah, that is end of part one, and it was amazing, solid. This does not feel like that. This felt like the movie should be longer, you know, and that to me is a problem. I think that actually is one of the only things holding this movie back, because I loved the first two acts in this movie. I thought they were phenomenal, and the third act was good, but I don't think the closing nailed it. It was just getting to the point where I was like, oh, something really cool is going to happen. But then I started realizing I've been hearing a lot of people talking about cliffhangers online. Does that mean it's about to end? And yes, that is exactly what happened. It just ended, and I was like, well, shit. And I was like, well, I kind of wanted to see a little more. Of course, we're going to see that next year. I'm a patient man. I can wait. But at the end of the day, I do think it holds back the ending of this film just because it wasn't a very climactic ending. It also doesn't help that a lot of the marketing of this movie is for the last half of the film. Like, a lot of it. Like, it takes a while to get to most of what you see in the marketing. So I was expecting most of that stuff to be happening throughout the whole film, and it doesn't happen till like very later on. And once you get there, you're like, well, I feel like I've seen most of these scenes now. And then there's just a little bit after that, you know what I mean? It's not like that much more after that. So although I think it was very well paced, I do feel like that final bit of the movie, it would have helped if there was maybe a way to shift the story around so you could get something a little more climactic at the end. Maybe they could have even ended it a bit shorter than what they did. But I'm still very excited for the next one because it did build it up very nicely. It's just a matter of, I do think it holds back this movie just a little bit. Another thing that I kind of mentioned before, look, I love animation when it's done right. I said before I don't prefer it, but that doesn't mean I can't love it in its own right. But there's some scenes in this that, although they look really great, it's a bit much. I feel like anyone with like maybe like bad eyesight, or maybe just gets headaches very easily, very easy to get motion sickness, they're probably gonna get that in this film, because some of what happens, it's just like crazy. I mean, of course it depends where you're watching it, what screen you're watching it on, but there was a couple scenes where like I had to kind of like look away for a split second because that was just too much color, too much flashing, too much craziness, and it was like almost overstimulating in some ways. And that's fine, you know, it's a, you know, across the multiverse you're gonna have that, of course, but sometimes I think it's slightly overdone, just slightly. It's not a big deal. This is not holding back the movie that much. It's just something I thought I should mention. Love the animation style, but I think sometimes they need to just dial it back just a tad bit. And the last negative I want to talk about was something I mentioned before. It is a very typical multiverse story. And that's a good thing because I like that story, but it's also a bad thing because, yes, it is something we've kind of seen before. Now, I usually don't use that as a negative, which is why I'm, you know, making sure to say that this is not really affecting my enjoyment of the film all that much. But at the end of the day, it still is something I want to mention because I do feel like a lot of people are going to call this movie like revolutionary in a lot of ways. In terms of animation, I think it is. But in terms of just pure writing and story, I don't think there's anything revolutionary about it. I think the overall story about it is pretty much the same as a lot of other things we've seen. It's very similar to Spider-Man No Way Home, and I don't just mean that because of the multiverse. There's literally a plot line that feels very similar to Spider-Man No Way Home, even if it wasn't a multiverse. It still is the same general concept. Even in terms of Multiverse of Madness, there's a lot of things that are literally like from that, and I'm sure that they've ripped from comics beforehand, but it doesn't change the fact that it still is a more recent idea, a more recent concept that we're already very much used to, and I don't think it makes it revolutionary just because of that, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, I love this movie. I think it was fantastic. It was definitely one of my favorite films of this year so far. In terms of the Spider-Man films, I've done a ranking a while ago. I'm not going to do another ranking. I did it right after No Way Home released. And I would probably throw this within maybe the top 6 Spider-Man movies, but Then again, I love pretty much 90% of the Spider-Man movies. Like, I would give 90% of them probably like a 9 out of 10 or above. So just know that just because it's not on like the top 5 or 4, like that does not mean I don't love this movie. I think it was really great. I think it was probably better than the first one, just by a tiny bit. And I think it would have been a lot better if that final act was just a bit better. It had some great reveals, had some great moments. It just didn't feel that climactic. And I know it's a part 1, but that does not mean that you can't still make it feel climactic, because I think many other part 1s have done that before. And yeah, I'm going to give it a rating of 9.3 out of 10. So it's not quite there to like the 9.5s, but it's pretty close. It's definitely deserving of the love it's getting online, 100%. It deserves all the love it's been getting, and I think it's definitely going to go down as one of the best animated films of all time. It would probably be in my top 5 for that, honestly. I said before, I'm not usually like a big animated film type person, but yeah, this would definitely be up there. Same with the first one. So let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. Did you see this movie? If you did you enjoy it? If you didn't, let me know. Are you going to go see it? And I will see you on my next one. Peace out.